Nathaniel said my emotions were exhausting, that my natural hair was unprofessional, that no man wants a woman who takes up this much space. For 7 years, I chemically straightened my curls. I swallowed my opinions at dinner parties. I made myself beige and silent and small enough to fit inside his perfect, polished world. I believed him when he said I was the problem. But standing outside the iron gates of our estate, his estate now, with nothing but a suitcase and the rain soaking through my coat, I didn't feel shattered. I felt something strange and terrifying. I felt light, like I'd been holding my breath underwater for years and someone finally dragged me to the surface. That's when I saw him. A black sedan. A man stepping out, tall and impossibly still, wrapped in dark tailoring that looked like it cost more than my marriage. Han Dae-Hyun didn't offer me his umbrella. He didn't ask if I needed help. He stood there in the rain, studying me with eyes that saw past the tears, past the mascara running down my brown skin, past the woman Nathaniel tried to erase. He spoke only once. Stop apologizing for crying. Tears mean you survived something that tried to kill you. Not pity, not rescue. Recognition. My name is Serena Mitchell, and this is the night I stopped being the woman who was too much and became the revelation a broken man couldn't destroy, and a dangerous one refused to ignore. If this story gave you chills, subscribe to watch Serena reclaim everything they said she'd never deserve. 8:16 p.m. The lawyer's pen made a scratching sound against paper that Serena would remember for the rest of her life. 3 signatures. 7 years reduced to ink and witnessed silence. Nathaniel didn't look at her. He never did anymore. Not really. He looked past her, through her, at the space she occupied as though calculating how quickly it could be filled with something more suitable. His lawyer slid the documents across the mahogany table, and Serena watched her married name disappear into a manila folder. "You can go now," Nathaniel said, adjusting his cufflinks, still so polished, still so perfect. Serena stood, her legs unsteady, and reached for her purse. That's when he spoke again, his voice low enough that the lawyers pretended not to hear. "You know, Serena, I tried. I really did. But no man wants a woman like you." She froze. "You feel everything too much. You cry at paintings. You laugh too loud at dinner parties. Your hair—" He gestured vaguely at the neat bun she'd tortured her curls into that morning. "Even when you try to fix it, it's still obvious. You were always going to be a burden. I just didn't realize how heavy until it was too late." The room tilted. Serena gripped the edge of the table, her throat closing around words that had died years ago from disuse. She wanted to scream that she had loved him, that she had reshaped herself, bone by bone, to fit inside his world, that she had given up her art studio, her friends, her name to become Mrs. Nathaniel Pierce. But she didn't say any of that. Instead, she picked up her purse, smoothed down her dress, and walked toward the door. Her heels clicked against marble, each step louder than she'd allowed herself to be in years. "Serena." She stopped but didn't turn around. I'm not the villain here," Nathaniel said. "I'm just the one honest enough to say what every man in my position would be thinking." Serena's hand rested on the doorknob. She felt the cold brass against her palm, grounding her, and for the first time in 7 years, she didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She didn't shrink. She simply opened the door and walked through it. Outside, the rain was already falling, washing the city clean. Serena stood on the courthouse steps, letting the water ruin her carefully flat-ironed hair, watching it begin to curl at the edges. She tilted her face toward the sky and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not her heart breaking. Her silence. I should have been afraid of him. A stranger. A man who moved like violence wrapped in expensive fabric. But fear requires energy I no longer had. So when Han Dae-Hyun gestured toward the open car door, I didn't ask questions. I just got in. The interior smelled like leather and something clean. Cedar, maybe. He didn't speak. Didn't ask where I was going or why I was standing in the rain like a woman who'd forgotten how to want shelter. He simply drove, his hands steady on the wheel, his silence somehow louder than Nathaniel's cruelest words. Then his eyes flicked to my neck. "That scarf," he said quietly. "You made it." I froze. My fingers, without thinking, touched the silk, a deep indigo piece I'd woven years ago, back when I still believed my art mattered. Before Nathaniel called it a hobby, before I stopped signing my work. "How did you—" The stitching pattern, Adinkra symbols layered with Korean jogakbo patchwork. His voice was calm, clinical. "I've been looking for the artist who created a series like this. 3 galleries refused to tell me her name." My throat tightened. They didn't refuse. They didn't know. I stopped using my name. He pulled the car to a stop beneath a streetlight. When he turned to face me, his expression was unreadable, but his eyes weren't. They held something I hadn't seen in 7 years. Respect. "Then it's time you took it back," he said, "because work like that doesn't beg for permission. It demands to be seen." For the first time since the gates closed behind me, I felt something dangerous stir in my chest. Not hope, hunger. The guest suite in Dae-Hyun's estate was larger than the bedroom I'd shared with Nathaniel for 7 years. Panoramic windows overlooked a garden lit by paper lanterns, and the bed was dressed in silk so dark it looked like spilled ink. Everything here was quiet, intentional, nothing like the cold marble and sharp edges of the Pierce mansion, where every surface felt like it was judging me. I stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection under soft light. My hair hung limp and lifeless, chemically flattened into submission. Nathaniel had once told me that professional women didn't wear their hair natural, that my curls were distracting. So every 6 weeks I sat in a salon chair while lye burned my scalp, erasing the texture my grandmother had called a crown. I turned on the shower. The steam rose like a confession. I didn't plan it. I just stepped under the water and started scrubbing. My fingers worked through the flat, processed strands, massaging my scalp until it tingled. The chemical smell began to fade, replaced by the scent of the expensive shampoo Dae-Hyun's housekeeper had left, something with honey and silk. I scrubbed harder. Harder, like I could wash away 7 years of shrinking. When I finally stepped out and wrapped myself in a robe, my hair was already beginning to coil. Tight spirals formed at my temples. My natural texture, kinky, voluminous, alive, started to emerge, wet and defiant against my skull. I heard a soft knock. "Come in," I said, my voice hoarse. Dae-Hyun entered without hesitation, carrying a tray with tea. He set it down on the vanity, then paused. His eyes moved to my hair, not with shock or judgment, but with something quieter. Appreciation. "You look different," he said. "I look like myself," I whispered. He stepped closer, and for a moment I thought he might touch me. Instead, he reached past me and picked up a wide-tooth comb from the counter. He placed it in my hand. "Then stop hiding her." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "In Korea, we have a word, jong. It means the invisible thread that binds people who've suffered together. You don't owe me gratitude, Serena, but you owe yourself the truth." The door closed softly behind him. I looked back at the mirror. My curls were beginning to dry, shrinking upward, framing my face in a halo of coils. I looked wild, unkempt, free. For the first time in years, I didn't reach for the flat iron. Subscribe to witness Serena reclaim the beauty Nathaniel tried to destroy. The email arrived at 6:47 a.m., prompt and devastating. Account access suspended pending legal review. Nathaniel hadn't just walked away from our marriage. He was trying to erase the financial proof I ever existed in it. I stared at my laptop screen in Dae-Hyun's guest suite, my hands shaking. 7 years of joint accounts, frozen. The small savings I'd tucked away for my art supplies, locked behind lawyers I couldn't afford. Nathaniel knew exactly what he was doing. If I couldn't eat, couldn't pay for studio space, couldn't survive, I'd come crawling back, or disappear entirely. I didn't hear Dae-Hyun enter. I just felt his presence, that unsettling calm that made rooms go quiet. "He's cutting off your resources," he said. Not a question. I nodded, throat too tight to speak. Dae-Hyun placed something on the desk beside my laptop, a checkbook, embossed, heavy, the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. "Write any amount," he said simply. "No conditions." I looked at the blank check, then at him. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, those eyes that had seen me sobbing in the rain, held no pity. Only certainty. "No," I whispered. His head tilted slightly. "No? If I take your money, I'm just trading one man's control for another's kindness. I need to know I can stand without anyone holding me up." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then the smallest shift at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, but something closer to respect. "Then I'll make a call," he said, pocketing the checkbook. "Your accounts will be unfrozen by noon. Not because I paid anyone, because your lawyer will be significantly better than his." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Independence isn't refusing help, Serena. It's choosing who deserves to stand beside you." The tea house was silent except for the deliberate sound of water meeting ceramic. Serena sat across from Dae-Hyun on a woven mat, her legs folded beneath her, watching his hands move with the precision of a man who understood that control was not cruelty. It was reverence. He poured slowly, steam curled between them. "In Korean art," he said without looking up, "there is a concept called yoke, the negative space, the emptiness between brushstrokes." He set the teapot down. "Westerners see it as absence. We see it as presence, the space where meaning breathes." Serena's fingers trembled as she lifted her cup. She thought of all the years she'd filled every silence with apologies, every pause with explanations, terrified that empty space meant she wasn't enough. "Nathaniel hated when I was quiet," she whispered. "He said silence made me seem distant, ungrateful." Dae-Hyun's gaze lifted, sharp and unrelenting. "He feared the space where you existed without needing him." The tea was bitter and perfect. She let it sit on her tongue. "I've been trying so hard to explain myself," she continued, her voice breaking slightly, "to prove I'm not difficult or too emotional or—" "Yoke," he interrupted softly. "You don't need to fill it. Let me sit in the quiet with you. Let me learn what exists there." Serena looked at him, really looked, and saw something she hadn't seen in 7 years. A man who didn't need her smaller. A man who could hold the weight of her silence without demanding she perform. She set her cup down. Her natural curls framed her face, wild and unapologetic. "What if the space between us is too much?" she asked. Dae-Hyun leaned forward, his voice low and absolute. "Then we'll make it sacred." Nathaniel Pierce didn't believe in regret. Regret was for weak men who second-guessed their decisions, who let emotion cloud their judgment. He had built an empire on certainty, on knowing exactly what and who belonged in his world and what didn't. So when his assistant placed the morning's society pages on his desk, he barely glanced at them. Just another Tuesday, another circuit of galas and openings he'd strategically chosen not to attend. Then he saw the photograph. It was taken at the Kim Gallery's opening night. Serena stood beside a textile installation. Her textile installation, the caption read, and next to her was Han Dae-Hyun. Not touching her, not smiling. Just standing there with that unsettling stillness that made even photographs feel dangerous. But it wasn't Dae-Hyun that made Nathaniel's breath catch. It was Serena. Her hair, those curls he'd called distracting and unkempt, framed her face in glorious, unapologetic volume. Her skin seemed to glow under the gallery lights, rich and luminous in a way he'd somehow trained himself not to see. She wore an emerald dress that wasn't trying to blend into anyone's background. And her smile, God, that smile, wasn't the careful, measured expression she'd worn at his fundraisers. She looked free. She looked like a woman who'd remembered she was extraordinary. Nathaniel read the article twice. Emerging textile artist Serena Mitchell debuts Unraveled, a groundbreaking fusion of African diasporic patterns and Korean silk techniques. I attended by collector and philanthropist Han Dae-Hyun, who reportedly commissioned 3 pieces before the exhibition even opened. His hand tightened around the newspaper. He'd told her no one would want her art, that her little hobby was an embarrassment, that she should focus on being the kind of wife who made him look good instead of wasting time on projects that would go nowhere. He'd been wrong. Worse, he'd been blind. The woman he'd spent 7 years diminishing had become exactly what he'd always wanted: powerful, desired, impossible to ignore. Except now she was standing next to a man whose net worth made Nathaniel's fortune look like pocket change. A man who clearly saw what Nathaniel had been too arrogant to recognize. He had owned a diamond and convinced himself it was glass. And now someone else was holding it up to the light. Nathaniel picked up his phone, then set it down. What would he even say? "I'm sorry I tried to erase you. Come back so I can do it right this time?" The truth settled over him like ice water. Serena Mitchell wasn't coming back. She didn't need to. She'd already become everything he'd told her she could never be, without him, despite him, and infinitely better for his absence. The studio smelled like jasmine incense and possibility. Serena stood back from the frame, her hands stained with indigo dye, her natural curls pinned up in a silk scarf Dae-Hyun had given her weeks ago. The textile stretched before her like a confession, 10 feet of raw silk interwoven with hand-dyed cotton, every thread deliberate. At every pattern, a conversation between 2 worlds she'd spent her entire life being told couldn't coexist. African Adinkra symbols, Sankofa, the bird reaching backward to retrieve what was lost, flowed seamlessly into Korean jogakbo patchwork, the negative space between each piece as intentional as the fabric itself. It wasn't fusion, it was dialogue. It was her. She hadn't heard Dae-Hyun enter. When she finally turned, he was standing in the doorway of her studio, perfectly still in his black suit, his expression unreadable. For a moment, she felt the old instinct. Explain yourself, justify your choices, make yourself smaller so he can breathe. But then she remembered. This man had never asked her to shrink. He walked forward slowly, his eyes never leaving the textile. When he stopped inches from the fabric, his hand lifted, not to touch, but to hover just above the surface, tracing the patterns in the air like they were sacred. "This," he said quietly, his voice low and certain, "is not art. This is a reckoning." Serena's breath caught. Dae-Hyun turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something unguarded in his eyes. Not pity, not admiration, awe. "Nathaniel told you that you were too much," he continued, stepping closer. "He was right. You are too much, for men who need women to be decorations. But this," he gestured to the textile, "this is what happens when a woman stops apologizing for her brilliance." Serena felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall, let them trace the curves of her brown skin, let them exist without shame. "I want to fund your first exhibition," Dae-Hyun said. "Not as charity, as an investment in work that deserves to be seen." She shook her head. "I don't need you to save me." "I know." His lips curved into the faintest smile. "That's why I'm asking." Serena looked at the textile, her masterpiece, her voice, her unraveling and her remaking all at once. She thought about the woman who used to straighten her curls to please a man who would never see her. That woman was gone. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's show the world what they tried to erase." Subscribe to witness Serena's gallery opening, and the moment Nathaniel realizes what he destroyed. The gallery preview was nearly empty when Nathaniel arrived. Serena should have known he'd choose this moment, when the crowd had thinned, when she was alone with her work, when her guard was down. She was adjusting the lighting on her centerpiece, a textile installation that wove African kente patterns through Korean silk, when she heard his voice behind her. "This is what you left me for? Fabric?" Her hands stilled on the frame. She didn't turn around. "I left you because you made me forget I was an artist in the first place." "You're embarrassing yourself, Serena." His footsteps moved closer, expensive shoes clicking against the polished concrete. Playing dress-up with some foreign gangster, pretending you're something you're not. Do you think he actually cares about you? Or is he just enjoying the novelty of... Finish that sentence. Dae-Hyun's voice cut through the space like a blade through silk. He hadn't raised his volume. He didn't need to. Nathaniel turned, and Serena watched his rehearsed confidence flicker. Dae-Hyun stood at the gallery entrance, perfectly still in his black suit, hands loose at his sides. There was no tension in his body, no anger in his expression. Just a terrible, patient calm, the kind that made prey animals freeze. "This is a private conversation," Nathaniel said, trying to recover his authority. "No." Dae-Hyun walked forward with measured steps. "This is a man who spent 7 years convincing a woman she was worthless, realizing too late that he discarded something irreplaceable. You don't know anything about our marriage. I know she stopped straightening her hair 3 months ago." Dae-Hyun stopped exactly 5 feet away, close enough to be heard, far enough to give Nathaniel space to leave with dignity. "I know she cried for 2 weeks when the chemicals washed out, not because it hurt, but because she'd forgotten what her own texture felt like. I know you told her that her natural beauty was something to be ashamed of." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "She needed guidance, structure. She was always so brilliant." Serena's voice surprised even herself. She stepped forward, standing between them now, her curls framing her face like a crown. "Talented, whole." For the first time in 7 years, Nathaniel had no response. Dae-Hyun's eyes never left him. "You have 10 seconds to leave this gallery. If I see you near her again, you'll learn the difference between a man who needs to control a woman and a man who simply refuses to let her be disrespected." Nathaniel looked at Serena one last time, really looked, and she saw it. The moment he realized what he'd lost. Not sadness, regret. He left without another word. Dae-Hyun turned to Serena, his terrifying calm dissolving into something gentler. "Are you all right?" She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. But this time, they weren't from pain. They were from relief. The gallery lights were soft gold against white walls, each piece of textile art suspended like prayers finally answered. Serena stood in the center of her own creation, a space that bore her name in elegant lettering above the door. Mitchell Studios. Not Pierce. Never Pierce again. Her natural curls framed her face in glorious defiance, each coil catching the light. The deep brown of her skin glowed against the midnight blue of her dress, a gown she'd designed herself, woven with both kenta patterns and Korean silk embroidery. 2 worlds, 1 woman, finally whole. Across the room, Nathaniel stood frozen near the entrance, saw his perfectly tailored suit suddenly looking like a costume. His new fiancée clung to his arm, but his eyes were locked on the centerpiece, Serena's masterwork titled Unraveling. The textile showed a woman's silhouette dissolving into threads of gold and crimson, then reforming into something larger, brighter, uncontainable. He'd come to see her fail. Instead, he was watching her coronation. Dae-Hyun appeared at Serena's side, his presence a study in terrifying calm. He didn't touch her, didn't claim her for the crowd. He simply stood there, his dark eyes tracking Nathaniel's every breath like a predator acknowledging prey he'd already decided wasn't worth the kill. "He looks like he's seen a ghost," Dae-Hyun murmured. "No," Serena said softly, her voice steady for the first time in years. "He's seen a woman he thought he buried. And she's standing taller than he ever allowed." Nathaniel started toward them, but Dae-Hyun's hand moved, just slightly, inside his jacket. The message was clear. Nathaniel stopped, turned, left. The crowd swallowed the moment, champagne flutes clinking, voices rising in admiration of Serena's work. But she barely heard them. She was watching Dae-Hyun, this man who'd appeared in the rain and changed everything. Except, had he? The realization settled over her like silk. Dae-Hyun hadn't saved her. He'd never tried to fix her, reshape her, or make her smaller so he could feel larger. He'd simply stood guard at the door while she clawed her way back to herself. He'd funded nothing. She'd used her divorce settlement. He'd created no opportunities. She'd built them with her own scarred hands. What he'd given her was rarer, permission to exist without apology. "You're staring," he said, the ghost of a smile on his lips. "I'm realizing something," Serena replied. "You didn't save me." Dae-Hyun's eyes softened, just barely. "No, I didn't. You just held the door open." "And you," he said quietly, reaching out to tuck a curl behind her ear, "walked through it like the revelation you always were." Serena smiled. Not the careful, small smile of a woman trying to take up less space, but the full, devastating smile of a woman who'd finally stopped shrinking. She was no longer Nathaniel's regret. She was her own empire. Subscribe and like to see more women rise from the ashes of men who tried to burn them.